I originally thought 360 was a little bit of a gimmick and I didn't know where it fit into my workflow, but headspace wise, using it as an action camera where in the software later you're gonna pick out your single moments and cut them into your sequence is probably the best way to think about it if you want to use it in cinematic edits. We go. Hey friend, Levi here, and in this video I want to walk you through how I edit 360 footage into my cinematic edits and just my workflow from beginning to end. I've really come to love using them on my personal adventures, and I've gotten a lot of questions about how to do it, and it's actually a lot easier than I would have even thought before I got into it. So I want to pull back the curtain and show you how I approach 360 footage in this video. I'm going to talk through the state of some of these cameras, so if you want to jump straight to the editing, just go to this timestamp right here. So the 360 camera I've currently been using is the Insta360 1R. I've used a lot of different options. This one's one of my favorites right now for a few different reasons, but I have it on a selfie stick like this. And because it has lenses on both sides there, it can stitch out the selfie stick and create that floating camera look. The one that I was using before that was the Insta360 1X. I've actually broken several and bought and replaced these from crashing, and so this one actually has a completely destroyed mount because I usually use these when I'm doing extreme sports, so I've broken them. But currently the 1R for me is the easiest to use. Some of the hiccups with this smaller one, even though the Insta360 1X is one of the best values for this style of camera currently as far as price to performance. But I had a hard time seeing the display sometimes when it was really bright sunlight out there, and that ran into some hiccups if I was in photo or video mode. And that is mostly solved by the 1R, where it's got a larger actual proper display there where you can see that you are in fact in the right mode. It's easier to start recording. A downside is the battery is a little bit, you just need to buy more of them, and they're a little bit more expensive than the ones that just go inside the Insta360 1X. These names are a mouthful, but essentially the image quality is going to be very similar between these two guys. These are kind of the best offerings right now for the action-ish world. This one is also slightly more waterproof. I didn't really run into waterproofing issues with the 1X because I'm not really dipping these things in water. So GoPro has an option as well. This is not it. This is the Hero 7, but they do have something called the Max, I believe, and you can get great results out of that as well. And then as far as shooting mentality, I try to just get single moments for 30 seconds to around a minute and then rotate kind of my angles because I don't want to get stuck with just one type of shot throughout the day. And it's fun doing follow shots, those kinds of things, because of the high resolution. It can actually internally stabilize fairly well and get rid of a bunch of that jitter. So you can get these really cool floating shots down through trees. And so the diversity here with the stabilization is pretty neat. Would I pick this over a standard GoPro? Right now for snowboarding, I would. For other instances, there's always going to be trade-offs. Right now, the audio quality in some of these smaller Insta360 ones leaves a lot to be desired. With the 1R, I personally don't care too much about switching to the other modules. If I use the 360 camera, it's going to be to shoot 360. I'm not usually going to be asking it to be a vlog camera or a 1-inch sensor camera. Or that kind of, to me, I won't do that very often, let's just say. I would almost prefer if we could get a bigger sensor, so that way the details resolved a little bit better. It had more clarity, better... basically better dynamic range preferably, but it's hard to argue with what you can get out of these guys, and it's been fun. You know, some of the shots I've gotten with it are pretty ridiculous, so I'm very happy. Okay, here's the original files imported from my Insta360 camera, and we want to render these into a format that can be edited in Final Cut Pro 10. The general principles I'm talking about through this video kind of apply to whatever editing software has 360 editing tools. So we're going to select all these shots that we just loaded in, go File, Batch Export, go down, Target Resolution, Original Bitrate, Encoding Format H.264, Flow State Stabilization turned on, all these turned off, hit OK after you select your destination, and render those all out. So you can actually keyframe and do camera motions inside of Insta's software. I prefer just taking them all into my native editor, so that way I can manipulate them all the way through to the end of my process. Once they're rendered, you should have a bunch of these MP4s that are mapped to the spherical sort of format. At this point, you can kind of just delete the native original files. Maybe you don't want to, but I would feel totally comfortable doing that. We want to take these files and import them into our editor because they're ready to edit. I import my footage by date in the master kind of event here, and then each keyword collection is the different cameras as I imported them into my computer. So right here, we've got the Insta360 footage, and what I'd normally do right away is select all of it and go transcode and transcode some proxies. I already did that, so we've got the proxies loaded. And one of the reasons for that is 5.7K footage that's H.265 just causes my laptop to lag out a little bit, especially when I'm trying to move around and remap shots and they haven't rendered yet. So getting those proxies going is helpful for just having smooth editing when I want to make sure that I'm dead on timing it to music. So I usually do that straight away. My next step here is I actually select all of the clips at once and go new project. And then I like editing in 2:1, but you can do this in 16:9 if you would like to. And we title this Insta360 B-roll cut V1. Okay, so here in the timeline, you can see all the shots look a little bit funny. So we want to tell Final Cut how to kind of show these files. So we're going to go over to our orientation settings, and we're going to change the mapping from normal to tiny planet. I used to think that was the wrong thing to do because I didn't want that tiny planet look. But what you'll notice is if you're on normal and you kind of zoom out to get a wider shot, you start getting that black edging. So if we stay in tiny planet, and get a wider shot, like instead of being at this tiny planet look like this, if we go somewhere down 117, I think, or even let's say 160, that's what starts to get us that floating camera look. And if we select this little weird shaped thing up there, that lets us change the orientation of our camera. So these tools are your friends, and I usually try to stay, let's kind of shift this. I usually try to stay, this is probably the widest I would go, that's at around 200. And then going in, maybe like 127 would be the tightest sort of action sports on a selfie stick style field of view. But I want to start in a neutral zone here. So we're actually going to go back out to around 163. So what we've just done is changed all the settings of these clips to these default ones as a starting point. Before I get in and start actually editing this stuff, I actually like to duplicate all of it once. We'll kind of explain why in a moment. So here's our exactly duplicated sections of footage. We're going to go now to the beginning, and this is the really fun part of editing where we just skim through and try to find moments that are usable. So we're going to skip forward a little deeper into this trail, hopefully find some cool tree stuff. On a typical snowboarding day, I do enjoy shooting with my proper camera and just with action cameras. On this day, I think I primarily stuck to just shooting with the 360 camera. So this sequence is fun, right? That's got a great look to it with the 360 camera. So without fussing too much about the angle, I'm going to chop that section out by pressing S, which is a cut right at my playhead, and just keep moving along. And then there's a fall, so I'm going to just avoid that. I'm just skimming along with my playhead. Going to hit Q to cut that whole section out back to my playhead. If you're unfamiliar of ripple editing, you're going to want to look up how to do that because it saves a lot of time here. So we're again just going through. See, these are the beautiful moments here, and we want to capture these and build our sequence out of it. So I'm hitting S again to chop that out. So you see, this is what the camera looks like when it dips into snow. It's not a great look. Chop off the beginning of this clip, keep going. This is a bit of that follow cam look that I appreciate. It's got a good vibe to it. A vibe, I don't know. There's a good instance of when the camera dips below. It's a shame because it kind of ruins the shot. And if I just held the camera up a little bit more, I wouldn't really like having that blackout moment in my edit, or that one either. Thankfully, my snowboarding isn't anything special there, so it's not like we're really missing out. But we're going to continue to go through all of the footage in that fashion, primarily looking for one perspective per piece that we cut out. Once we've done that to this whole section, and let's say we've trimmed it down, we're going to move to the duplicated section. And this we can move pretty quickly, but we're going to reorient all the shots to be looking forward away from me, because sometimes there's cool moments that happen that aren't me, the actual subject holding the stick. It's actually of what I'm recording. And especially when I'm snowboarding with someone else, you can get a really cool follow shot. So let's orient the camera away from me. We're going to be pointing down the hill. And now we're going to burn through here and try to see if we can find one of those moments of following someone else. And I do this in two separate chunks. That way I don't want that FOMO that I'm missing a cool follow shot and I'm always reorienting the 360 footage. I like keeping the orientation roughly the same for burning through the footage. Once I've done one pass, I move on to my second pass, which is the forward-looking angle. So making a fast pass through this whole footage here, I'm not going to bore you with doing it now, but we'd end up with what I would call our selects moments, these 5 to 30 second chunks that are high action oriented, and they've got kind of those pieces of the moments that we want to now use in our edit and cut to music. And I like leaving the selects in their own sequence, its own version number, and duplicating it if I'm going to manipulate it more. But then the reason why I leave it there is so I can always go back and reference that first stage of me going through and cutting out the selects. So once I have those selects cut, I would then kind of copy them all like this, paste them into the sequence where I'm actually building the story. So let's show you what a sequence would look like where I have a story kind of fleshed out and we're integrating 360 footage with other formats to try to create this cinematic feel in a sequence. So before we dive into the sequence, I wanted to tell you about the sponsor of this video, and that is our friends over at Squarespace. Now, Squarespace is a fantastic all-in-one website building platform where they have all the tools necessary to get a web page up and running and having it look fantastic. So you can go there, get a domain, pick out one of their beautiful designer templates and start adding your content. And next thing you know, you've got a website. It honestly is a lot quicker than you would expect. And their drag and drop system is effortless to use. You don't need any previous training. And the cool part is that there's no upgrades or patches or anything you need to install ever. All the tools are just there, ready to go. And there's some powerful functionality for embedding videos, images, making the website do what you want it to do if you're trying to book clients, have a contact form. I've been a happy customer of Squarespace for long before they became a sponsor because it's just so straightforward to use and the results look really professional. So I recommend if you have a business idea that you're trying to get off the ground or a message that's important to you and you want to share it with people, head over to Squarespace and start a free trial, start building your website. And when you're ready to commit, make sure you use my code for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Yo.
Is it too late to be FaceTiming you?
No, I just got home from a run. Just getting water.
Look at you go. Do you have a quick tip on some 360 editing?
Yeah. I mean, I probably have a bunch of tips, but I'm saving that for my video. Much better video.
Yeah, like and subscribe.
No, I think for me, the biggest thing is to not overdo it. You know, it can be really tempting, like with any new tool, to just constantly use the technique and always go to tiny planet, zoom in, whip around, and it just eventually it stops being what an interesting shot and just becomes yeah, we get it, you have a 360 camera. The same thing happens with drones and sliders and stuff, but I think they're pretty incredible tools to get shots that you just can't get otherwise. And so with that said, I think you should just be what's the word? You should be cautious with how much and where and when you use them.
Right, because then it will still wow the viewer.
Yeah, totally.
Thanks, Jesse.
Oh, no problem. All right, dude, I'm going to let you go, though. I got to do a one-wheel swap.
Dude, great to see you. Take care.
Kevin?
Big kisses for you. Love you.
Okay, here we are inside of this video that I made in Montana with my buddy Isaac. We ski toured up to this abandoned hut, and the climax of the story, or the big payoff, is us going and skiing down the next day. So this was a great moment to be using some 360 footage, and I don't just jump into 360 footage in my edits. I try to build towards it and use it as a tool within the edit itself. That's kind of what I mean by using that cinematic word, intentionally placing it in between other formats. So having a slow motion iPhone shot, having GH5 shots, then some 360 stuff where it applies, and varying my angles so that way it fits together cohesively. So as we look at this, this is kind of our building up shots as we leave the cabin. It's all shot on GH5. And then I cut to shots of Isaac putting on his gear. And if I shot this on 360, it wouldn't really suit the purpose. This wouldn't really be a great way to do it. You could do it, but it's more, again, cinematic. I'm using that word loosely, but it creates more of a building tension to use proper focal lengths to actually use visual language the way it's meant to be used. And when we get to this big sweeping drone shot pushing in, it actually kind of means something after our tight, smaller, close shots. So let's jump ahead a tiny bit, but we get to this action moment where the music picks up and we're now cranking along in the edit, and I want these shots of us actually snowboarding down, which we're done with the 360 camera. So this is, let's play this here. This is an opening shot of me, and then it cuts to a reverse as if Isaac was holding the camera behind me. Now, obviously, those are two different moments because I had one 360 camera going, so I was holding it for about a 2-minute chunk, and then I passed it to Isaac and he held it and followed me. But I cut those together in non-chronological order. So that way, as we play this one here, this is the follow shot, but then it cuts to me holding it, and it kind of has a cohesive, unique feel as it switches between the two angles. And as I would be editing these clips in, I'd be selecting them and fine-tuning the orientation of the camera perspective, and also changing the field of view slightly depending on what vibe I was going for. You go too wide, doesn't really look good. Somewhere, I think on this one I was at around 127. Change the perspective a little bit. You can see how much that horizon line changes because it's a 360 shot when you change orientation, so just be mindful of that. But I'm doing those small corrections now as I'm timing this edit to music. So we just had a sequence of 3 or 4 shots of myself snowboarding, so we've transitioned to a moment featuring Isaac. This is him holding it selfie mode. This is me following Isaac. So again, those are from 2 separate holding moments. We cut to an Isaac point of view shot, and then to spice it up, we add in this shot on iPhone, actually in slow motion, of Isaac ripping down this line. And the whole thing we're trying to do here is not bore the viewer, because if we have too much of the same thing in a row, it really starts to get stagnant and boring. So then again, we're on Isaac, and then I think we're onto a Levi sequence now. So this is me self holding it, different perspective looking down the hill, cutting to a GoPro shot where I'm kind of adding story elements in. So that whole sequence there, that brought us to 13 minutes. The action sequence, that's about a 40-second sequence of primarily 360 footage. And that's about as long as I would ever have back to back to back to back. Because you hang on 360 stuff for too long and it starts to get boring for the viewer. Now, let's address keyframed camera moves. That is definitely something you could do. So an example for that would be, let's select this shot. Let's say we wanted to rotate from Isaac to me mid-shot. To accomplish that, we'd select it, click orientation, and we'd add keyframes here to the perspectives that we're changing. So you can keyframe everything, or you could keyframe field of view, tilt. So we'll set keyframes here at the beginning of the clip of where we want it. And let's say we rotate it to Isaac. So that'll be our first frame. So we play partway in on this clip. So we're hitting play. We're going to readjust it here, and it's going to auto add keyframes because we have them turned on. So there's adjustment to pan up with him. We're going to lengthen this clip by dragging it out. Let's add another set of keyframes just by clicking there. Actually, let's just use our orientation to rotate slightly. And then now we're going to pivot it to me. So we're skipping forward a couple seconds. And let's rotate it around to me. So what that accomplishes, if we play that back, it's on Isaac, camera angle's adjusting slightly, rotates around to me. That's something you can do. I prefer to not do it because to me it kind of feels like you're doing a zoom in on a camcorder. It's fun doing those kind of whip pans, I guess, but I actually haven't found that there's many moments that I end up doing that. I tend to be the edit style where more I pick certain perspectives, hold on them, maybe make micro adjustments to the camera angle so that way I stay in frame, but just kind of hold it. When I get to the color grading stage, I didn't even address that, but I tended to shoot in the standard mode. The log mode I'm not as happy with. I tend not to like log footage when it's shot in compressed bit rates and it's 8-bit footage and it's like 100 megabits per second and it's high res. I don't find log footage in those formats really shines and gives you the full flexibility you're looking for here. So I'll shoot it in kind of that standard look and hope to get it right in camera. But it is important to shoot with a continuous white balance so that way your shots aren't rapidly changing throughout the sequence. This is so important. So I'll typically shoot in 5600 Kelvin, which is daylight. So that way it's not rapidly changing throughout my shots and then shot matching is a disaster. And I also try to just make sure that I'm not losing highlights. So sometimes I dip down. If you're shooting in snow, you've got to compensate the auto exposure settings so that way it's not shooting too dark or too bright. But that's generally what piecing together a sequence would end up looking like for me. And that's my workflow on how I edit 360 footage into my cinematic edits. It's nothing crazy special, to be honest with you, but it is so much easier to work with these modern 360 cameras than it was even I don't want to shoot myself in the foot here, but not that long ago, working with 360 footage was very challenging, and it's been getting easier and easier, which is pretty rad. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. And remember, life's better when you make stuff. Peace.